The Grand Senate chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of polished obsidian and living crystal, and 200 species had built it together over 10,000 years of peace. Light from a dying star poured through windows carved from solidified plasma, casting everything in shades of amber and gold. This was the heart of the Galactic Concordat, the place where civilizations rose and fell with the sound of a single vote. Fleet Admiral Varakthos stood at the entrance and felt the weight of his years pressing down upon his scarred shoulders. His bioluminescent scales had once glowed bright blue with the fire of youth, but now they flickered with the dim purple of old age. He walked slowly because his left leg had never healed properly after the Battle of Crimson Nebula, and every step reminded him of wars that younger beings had already forgotten. The chamber was full today, and that was unusual. Representatives from the 12 elder species occupied their traditional seats in the inner ring. The Moravians with their crystalline bodies that sang when they spoke. The Etheri who existed as clouds of sentient gas contained in magnetic fields. The proud Kethori whose ancestors had mapped the first jump routes between stars. All of them had gathered for a single purpose, and Varakthos knew exactly what that purpose was. They were here to discuss humanity. A ripple of amusement passed through the chamber as the topic was announced. Varakthos watched the representatives exchange glances of barely hidden contempt, and he felt a cold anger building in his chest. He had expected this reaction, but expecting something and witnessing it were very different experiences. "The motion before us today," announced the Grand Arbiter, a being of pure thought projected into a humanoid shape, "concerns the admission of the human species to permanent membership on this council." Laughter echoed through the ancient hall. Ambassador Kethmara of the Luminari rose first, his golden feathers ruffling with barely contained scorn. "With the greatest respect to whoever submitted this motion, I must question whether this is a serious proposal or some form of elaborate joke. Humans have been part of our galactic community for barely 200 years. They are infants by any reasonable measure." More laughter, louder this time. "Furthermore," Kethmara continued, spreading his wings for emphasis, "what exactly do humans offer that would justify such an honor? They possess no natural weapons. Their bodies are soft and fragile. They cannot survive in vacuum or extreme temperatures. They lack telepathy, lack bioluminescence, lack the ability to photosynthesize or regenerate lost limbs. By every objective measure, they are one of the weakest species ever to achieve spaceflight." The Moravian delegate chimed in with a sound like breaking glass, which was their form of agreement. "The Luminari speaks truth. Humans are adequate traders and surprisingly creative engineers, but they contribute nothing that would warrant a seat among the elder races. Perhaps in another 1,000 years, when they have proven themselves." Varakthos listened to speaker after speaker dismiss humanity with casual contempt. They called humans primitive, emotional, irrational, and short-lived. They pointed out that human lifespans rarely exceeded 100 years, which was barely enough time to master a single discipline by Concordat standards. They noted that humans still fought wars among themselves, still struggled with disease and poverty, still had not achieved the perfect unity that characterized truly advanced civilizations. And through it all, Varakthos remained silent. He was waiting. Finally, after the 16th speaker had finished explaining why humans were unworthy of consideration, the Grand Arbiter turned toward the old Zervani warrior. "Fleet Admiral Varakthos, you requested time to address this assembly. The Council recognizes your service and grants you the floor." Varakthos rose slowly, his ancient joints protesting the movement. He looked around the chamber at all those superior faces, all those beings who had never seen what he had seen, and he felt something between pity and disgust. "You are all fools," he said. The chamber went absolutely silent. No one had ever spoken to the Council in such a manner. Several representatives rose in outrage, but Varechthos held up one scarred hand, and something in his eyes made them sit back down. This was a being who had commanded fleets, who had faced death 100 times, who had earned every mark on his weathered hide through blood and fire. "You speak of humans as if they were nothing," Varechthos continued, his voice growing stronger with every word. "You measure them by their bodies, by their lifespans, by their lack of natural advantages. You see a species with soft skin and dull teeth, and you assume that this makes them weak." He paused and let his gaze sweep across the assembly. "I was there at Helion 4 60 years ago. I commanded the Concordat Relief Fleet during the Kathravi incursion. I watched with my own eyes as 40,000 humans faced a swarm that had devoured 100 worlds before them." The mention of the Kathravi brought a different kind of silence. Every species in the galaxy knew about the swarm, that terrible locust-like race that consumed entire biospheres. They had been the great terror of the Outer Rim for 10,000 years, unstoppable and utterly without mercy. "We went to Helion IV expecting to evacuate refugees," Varechthos said. "We expected to find a beaten population waiting gratefully for rescue. We expected to save a few thousand survivors and then sterilize the planet from orbit, as protocol demanded." His scales flickered with remembered emotion. "Instead, we found something that changed everything I thought I knew about courage, about fear, and about what it truly means to be dangerous." He looked directly at Ambassador Kethmara, who had laughed the loudest. "We thought we were rescuing them," Varechthos said softly. "We were wrong. By the time it was over, they had rescued us, and they had taught the Kathravi swarm something that no species in 10,000 years had ever taught them." "What was that?" the Grand Arbiter asked. Varechthos smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Fear," he answered. "The swarm learned fear. Now sit down, close your mouths, and listen to my story. When I am finished, you will never look at humans the same way again." The planet Helion 4 hung in space like a blue and green jewel, and Varechthos remembered thinking how beautiful it looked from orbit. His fleet had traveled 14 jump points to reach this distant colony world, and they had come expecting tragedy. The Kathravi swarm had been detected in the system 11 days earlier, and no world had ever survived more than 3 days once the swarm made landfall. Fleet Admiral, his tactical officer, reported, "We are detecting massive swarm presence on the surface. Estimated numbers exceed 12 million combat units." Varechthos had nodded grimly at those numbers. 12 million Kathravi was enough to strip a planet bare in less than a week. The locust-like creatures moved in endless waves, consuming everything organic in their path, from forests to animals to the unfortunate inhabitants of any world they targeted. "What about the human colony?" he had asked. "Are there survivors?" "Unknown, sir. We are detecting energy signatures from the main settlement, but the swarm is concentrated heavily in that area." That was strange. The swarm usually spread out quickly to maximize consumption. Why would they concentrate around a single location? "Take us in closer," Varechthos had ordered, "and prepare the evacuation transports." What he saw as they descended through the atmosphere changed everything. The human capital city of New Mombasa still stood. Its outer districts burned with fires that painted the sky orange and red, but the central core remained intact behind walls of debris and wreckage. And everywhere Varechthos looked, he saw humans fighting. They were not hiding in bunkers waiting for rescue. They were not fleeing in panic toward the landing zones. They stood on barricades made from destroyed vehicles and collapsed buildings, and they fought with everything they had. Varechthos watched a group of humans with mining equipment charge directly into a wave of Kathravi. They swung their heavy tools like ancient warriors with clubs and axes, smashing chitin and crushing limbs. When one human fell, another immediately took their place. There was no hesitation, no retreat, no surrender. How is this possible? His second-in-command whispered. They should all be dead. No species has ever held against the swarm for more than 3 days. Varakthos had no answer. He ordered his forces to land inside the human perimeter, and he personally led the first contact team to meet with the colony leadership. They found the humans in a building that had once been a school but was now a command center and hospital combined. The walls were scorched, the windows were shattered, and everywhere Varakthos looked, he saw wounded humans being treated by other humans who were often wounded themselves. A woman approached them through the chaos. She was tall and dark-skinned, with gray in her hair and blood on her hands. Her eyes held exhaustion that went beyond physical tiredness. But beneath that exhaustion burned something that Varakthos did not recognize at first. "I am Mayor Catherine Okonkwo," she said. "Thank you for coming, Admiral. We could use some help with the Easter barricade." Varakthos stared at her in confusion. "Mayor Okonkwo, I am here to evacuate your people. The Concordat has authorized orbital bombardment once civilians are clear. You must begin loading your population onto our transports immediately." The human woman looked at him as if he had said something incomprehensible. "Evacuate?" she repeated. "Admiral, we have 40,000 people in this city. Your transports might hold 5,000. What happens to the rest? The Concordat will make efforts to save as many as possible, but casualties are inevitable. The priority is genetic preservation and—" "No," Mayor Okonkwo said. Just that single word. No explanation, no negotiation, no room for discussion. Varakthos felt his scales flush with frustration. "Mayor, you do not understand. The swarm cannot be defeated by ground forces. Your situation is hopeless. Logic demands. Logic can wait its turn," the human interrupted. "These are our homes, Admiral. These are our families. We do not abandon our ground. You will die." "Maybe," she agreed, and somehow she smiled while saying it. "But we will die here, together, fighting for what is ours. And we will make them pay for every meter they take from us." Varakthos looked around at the other humans in the command center. Wounded soldiers were climbing off medical beds and picking up weapons. Elderly citizens were loading ammunition. Children were carrying water and bandages to the fighters on the barricades. Every single one of them knew they were facing death, and not one of them seemed willing to run. "This is madness," Varakthos whispered. "No, Admiral," Mayor Okonkwo replied. "This is humanity. Now, are you going to help us, or are you going to stand there and lecture us about logic while the swarm eats our neighbors?" In that moment, Varakthos made a decision that would haunt and honor him for the rest of his long life. He activated his communication device and contacted his fleet. "All units, this is Fleet Admiral Varakthos. Disregard evacuation orders. I am committing all ground forces to defensive operations in support of the human colony. Repeat, we are staying to fight." His officers questioned him. His superiors sent furious demands for explanation. The Concordat tactical doctrine was clear. Never engage the swarm in ground combat, because no species could win such a battle. But Varakthos had looked into the eyes of Catherine Okonkwo and had seen something that no manual had ever described. He had seen a species that refused to calculate the odds. He had seen beings who transformed their own mortality into a source of strength rather than weakness. He had seen humans, and for the first time in his life, Fleet Admiral Varakthos of the Zervani Third Fleet was genuinely afraid. Not afraid of the swarm. Afraid of what it meant that such creatures existed in the universe. Afraid of what would happen to anyone foolish enough to threaten what these soft, short-lived, seemingly fragile beings called home. He ordered his soldiers to take their positions alongside the humans, and the true battle for Helion 4 began. 40 days passed on Helion 4, and each day taught Varekthos something new about the species he had underestimated. The Zorvani were considered excellent warriors by galactic standards. They could fight for 8 hours before requiring rest, could heal minor wounds through meditation, and could survive conditions that would kill most carbon-based life forms. Varekthos had always been proud of his species and their martial capabilities. The humans made him feel inadequate. On the third day of the combined defense, Varekthos noticed a human soldier named Marcus Chen still fighting on the eastern barricade. This was strange because Varekthos had personally seen the same soldier fighting on the western barricade the previous morning. When he checked the duty rosters, he discovered that Private Chen had been awake and fighting for 42 consecutive hours. "You need to rest," Varekthos told him. "No organism can function effectively without sleep." Marcus Chen had laughed at him. Actually laughed. "Admiral, I slept for 4 hours yesterday. I am fine. Besides, my friends are out there, and they need me. 4 hours of sleep cannot sustain combat effectiveness." "Watch me," the human said, and he turned back to the barricade and kept fighting. Varekthos watched. He watched humans push their bodies far beyond any reasonable limit. He watched them consume bitter drinks they called coffee that somehow extended their wakefulness through pure chemical stubbornness. He watched wounded soldiers refuse medical evacuation, choosing instead to wrap their injuries in bandages and return to the line. One human woman fought with 3 broken ribs for 2 days before finally collapsing. When she woke up in the medical center, her first words were a demand to be returned to her unit. "Why do you do this to yourselves?" Varekthos asked Mayor Okonkwo during a brief moment of calm. "Your bodies are fragile. You must know that you are causing permanent damage." Catherine Okonkwo looked at him with those tired, burning eyes. "Admiral, every person on that barricade has someone they love behind them. Parents, children, friends, neighbors. How can we rest when they are counting on us? How can we stop when stopping means they die? But you will burn out. You cannot sustain this pace." "We do not need to sustain it forever," she replied. "We only need to sustain it long enough." That was when Varekthos began to understand. Humans were not stronger than other species. They were not faster or tougher or better equipped. But they possessed something that Varekthos had never encountered before. They simply refused to stop. They would keep going until their bodies literally failed them, and even then they would try to crawl back to the fight. On the 15th day, something even more disturbing happened. A Zorvani scout named Kethlis was wounded during a patrol outside the perimeter. The swarm had ambushed his unit, and most of his companions had died in the initial attack. Kethlis himself had taken severe injuries to his lower body and could not walk. According to Zorvani doctrine, he should have been left behind. The needs of the many outweighed the survival of one wounded soldier, especially one who could not contribute to the defense. This was logical, practical, and accepted by all civilized species. But a human soldier named James Okafor refused to follow logic. Varekthos watched through surveillance drones as Private Okafor lifted the wounded Zorvani onto his back and began walking. The human was not large or particularly strong by any standard, and Kethlis weighed nearly twice as much as he did. The journey back to the perimeter was 3 kilometers through territory, crawling with swarm units. James Okafor walked every single meter of that distance. He walked through pain that should have stopped him. He walked through exhaustion that should have dropped him. When swarm scouts detected them, he hid and waited, then kept walking. When Kethlis told him to leave him behind, he refused. When his legs began to fail, he crawled, dragging the Zorvani behind him. It took 7 hours, but he made it. When they finally reached the barricade, a dozen humans rushed out to help carry them both to the medical center. Varekthos arrived to find Private Okafor unconscious from exhaustion, his muscles torn, his feet bleeding, his body pushed far past its breaking point. "Why?" Varekthos demanded. "Why would you do this? He is not even your species." A human medic looked up at him with genuine confusion. "What does species matter? He is one of us now. You do not leave your people behind, Admiral. Not ever. You do not leave your people behind." Those 6 words echoed in Varekthos' mind for the rest of the siege. He watched humans mourn Zervani dead as if they were family members. He watched his own soldiers begin to adopt human phrases and human customs. He watched the 2 species merge into something new, something unified by shared suffering and shared purpose. The swarm noticed too. On the 20th day, the Kethravi attacks became less coordinated. On the 25th day, they began to hesitate before charging the barricades. On the 30th day, Varekthos observed something that no Concordat scholar had ever documented: swarm units retreating without direct cause. The mindless hunger that drove the Kethravi was being infected by something foreign. They were experiencing an emotion that their species had never needed to evolve. They were learning to fear their prey. And Varekthos finally understood what made humans truly terrifying. They were persistent predators, creatures who had evolved to chase prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. They did not need to be the fastest or the strongest. They simply needed to keep going, and they would chase you forever if necessary. The swarm had conquered 100 worlds because no species could match their numbers or their relentless hunger. But they had never faced a species that was more relentless than they were. The aftermath of the attack brought chaos of a different kind to Threshold Station. Marcus stood in the station command center, still wearing his armor. Surrounded by security officers and diplomats and officials from a dozen different species, news feeds across the galaxy were broadcasting footage of his rescue, showing an armored human walking through vacuum and defeating 8 armed terrorists in seconds. The secret was out, and there was no putting it back. Athalver stood beside him, refusing to leave his side despite suggestions from her own diplomatic staff that she distance herself from the situation. "The Council is demanding answers," a Civithi official announced. "They want to know what else humans have been hiding. Then we will give them answers." A new voice said from the doorway. Marcus turned to see a human woman in formal diplomatic attire entering the room. Her hair was gray, and her face was lined with years of difficult service. But her eyes were sharp and determined. "I am Ambassador Sarah Okonkwo," she said, "representative of Earth to the Galactic Council, and I arrived as quickly as I could." She walked up to Marcus and looked him over with an expression that mixed respect with understanding. "The cat is out of the bag. Sergeant Webb," she said quietly. "Time to tell them everything. I was never good at speeches." Marcus replied, "You do not need to be," the ambassador said. "Just tell them the truth." Within hours, an emergency session of the Galactic Council convened via holographic link. Representatives from dozens of species appeared in the station's largest conference chamber, their images filling the room with a rainbow of alien forms. The mood was tense and hostile, with accusations flying from multiple directions. The humans have been hiding military capabilities far beyond what they disclosed. One representative shouted, "What else are they concealing?" Demanded another, "They could be a threat to the entire council." A Vrax diplomat insisted, despite the fact that his own species had just committed an act of terrorism. Ambassador Okonkwo raised her hand for silence. And gradually the chamber grew quiet. "You want truth," she said. "Very well. Sergeant Webb will give you truth." Marcus stepped forward, feeling the weight of 1,000 eyes upon him. He had faced worse, he reminded himself. He had faced the Devourers themselves. This was just talking 30 years ago, he began. Humanity faced extinction. He activated a display that showed the images from his memorial room. The Devourers emerging from their dimensional rifts, the burning ships, The dying Earth gasps filled the chamber as the alien representative saw for the first time what humanity had survived. Marcus told them everything he told them about the 4 years of constant warfare, the billions of dead, the desperate final battle in orbit of Earth. He told them about the 100,000 soldiers who had gone up knowing they would not come back down, and the 12,000 who had somehow survived. He told them about humanity's choice to hide the war, to seal the records, to bury the trauma in the hopes of building something better. "We did not hide a weapon from you," he said finally. "We hid a wound." The chamber was silent when he finished. Sheketh stepped forward to speak. "I have spent weeks with Marcus Webb," she said, and her voice carried the weight of her diplomatic reputation. "I have felt his grief and his dedication and his honor with my own senses. Humanity did not deceive the Council to protect a threat," she continued. "They deceived the Council to protect themselves while they tried to heal. We need to ask ourselves what kind of community punishes a species for trying to overcome their trauma," she concluded. "What kind of council rejects those who chose peace when they could have demanded power?" Her words hung in the air, one by one. Representatives from smaller species began to speak. A Krull delegate told of how human traders had protected his colony during a pirate attack. Asking nothing in return, a Sivathi delegate described how human engineers had improved their medical ships, saving thousands of lives. More testimonies followed. Stories of humans teaching and helping and building, all while carrying their secret pain. Finally, the first speaker of the council called for order. "We have heard the testimony," the ancient being said. "Now we must decide." The debate lasted for hours, but in the end, the decision was clear. Humanity would remain a full member of the Galactic Council. The siege of Earth would be entered into the official records as a tragedy to be honored, not a deception to be punished. Human veterans would be offered support from Council psychological services if they wished it, and a joint memorial would be built on Threshold Station to honor all who had fallen in the war against the Devourers. But the most important part of the decision came last. Humanity's choice to seek peace after war is not a weakness or a deception. The first speaker announced, "It is the most profound demonstration of wisdom this council has ever witnessed." In the weeks that followed, Marcus was offered commendations and promotions and political positions from a dozen different organizations. He declined them all. "I am a mechanic," he told anyone who asked. "That is all I want to be." But something had changed in him, a lightness that had not been there before. Other human veterans began reaching out. Many for the first time in decades. They shared stories and memories and grief, building a community that had been missing since the war ended. Marcus returned to Base 7 and resumed his work. But now he allowed Darvak, the Krull apprentice, to assist him regularly. He attended multi-species gatherings sometimes, and he even smiled occasionally. The memorial room in his quarters remained, but it was no longer locked. Veterans came to visit, and families of the fallen, and curious aliens who wanted to understand what humanity had endured. Marcus gave tours and told stories, keeping the memory alive while finally allowing others to help carry the weight. On the day HFY was scheduled to return to Valorian space, she found Marcus in Day 7 one last time. He was working on a new ship, explaining something to Dorvac with patient attention. "Will you be all right?" she asked. Marcus looked at the young apprentice, then toward his quarters where the memorial waited. Then he looked at HFY, and for the first time since she had met him, his eyes held something like peace. "I think I might be," he said. Eventually, they embraced briefly, promising to stay in contact across the vast distances of space. After she was gone, Marcus returned to his memorial room and added one new element to the display. Was a holographic image from the dedication ceremony of the joint memorial on Threshold Station. It showed representatives of dozens of species standing together, honoring the humans who had died to save a world that the galaxy had not even known existed. His Old Sergeant's name was on the central plaque. Along with all the others who had not made it home, Marcus saluted the armor one final time, touching his hand to his forehead in the old military tradition. Then he turned and walked back into the light. Back to Base 7, back to his work, back to the living behind him. The memorial stood in silent witness to what humanity had endured and what they had chosen to become on the wall. A photograph showed Marcus's old unit smiling before the final battle, young and hopeful and unaware of what was coming below it. Someone had inscribed a quote that Marcus had suggested for the station memorial. They asked us what we fought for. The inscription read, "We said, tomorrow," and tomorrow had finally come. Ketfer found herself thinking about the human mechanic long after she should have been attending to other matters. Her diplomatic mission to Threshold Station was supposed to be about observing human integration into galactic society, writing reports for the council about this strange new species that had joined their community only 2 decades ago. But Marcus Webb had become a mystery she could not ignore. She returned to Base 7 the next morning with a container of sweet Valorian tea, and she found Marcus already at work on the underside of her ship. His movements were precise and controlled. Like a dancer performing a routine he had practiced 1,000 times. "Good morning," she called out. And Marcus slid out from beneath the hull on a wheeled platform. His face was smudged with lubricant, and his eyes looked tired. And she wondered if he ever truly rested, Ambassador. He acknowledged with a small nod. "I brought tea," she said, holding up the container. "I thought you might appreciate something warm while you work." Marcus hesitated for just a moment before accepting the offer, and they sat together on supply crates while he took small sips of the unfamiliar drink. Kethover watched him carefully, using her empathic abilities to read the emotions that flowed beneath his calm exterior. What she found there made her heart ache. Layers of grief stacked upon grief. Old wounds that had never healed, and a loneliness so deep it seemed bottomless. Yet there was also something else, a fierce determination and a sense of purpose that burned like a small flame refusing to die. "Tell me about your work," she said gently. "How did you become a ship mechanic?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and she thought he might not answer at all. "I learned during the service," he finally said. "Military engineering." This was interesting new information, for she had researched human culture extensively and found very little about their military history. The databases were strangely empty on the subject, as if someone had deliberately removed the records. "Were you a soldier?" she asked. "Engineer," Marcus corrected. "Combat engineer." He said nothing more, and Ketfer sensed that pushing further would only make him retreat into silence. Instead, she changed the subject and asked about the technical challenges of repairing so many different types of vessels. Marcus seemed more comfortable with this topic, and he explained the differences between Xanthari power systems and Crow propulsion technology and the unique challenges of Civithi life support systems. She found herself genuinely fascinated by his knowledge. A young Krell apprentice named Dorvac came into the bay later that morning, seeking Marcus's guidance on a repair he was attempting in Bay 12. Marcus walked the young alien through the problem with patient precision, never raising his voice or showing frustration at the apprentice's mistakes. "Why do you care so much?" Dorvac asked after Marcus had explained the importance of triple-checking every connection. "It is just a cargo ship." Marcus fixed the young Krell with a look that made Dorvac stand a little straighter. "Someone is trusting their life to that ship," Marcus said quietly. "That is never just anything." Dorvac nodded and hurried back to his own bay, and Ketfer felt something shift in her understanding of the human before her. This was not simply dedication to a craft. This was something closer to a sacred duty. She began to spend more time in Base 7, finding excuses to observe Marcus at work and engage him in conversation. Slowly, very slowly, he began to open up to her about small things. his preference for manual repairs over automated systems, his appreciation for well-designed spacecraft, his quiet admiration for the diversity of the galactic community. But whenever she approached certain topics, particularly anything related to his past or his military service, he would grow silent and change the subject. One afternoon, she asked about Earth, about the planet where humanity had evolved and built their civilization. "It is beautiful," Marcus said. And for just a moment, his voice carried a weight that revealed how much that word meant to him. "Green and blue and full of life. You miss it?" She asked. "Every day," he admitted. And then he turned back to his work, as if he had already said too much. That evening, Kethver encountered a group of beings in the diplomatic quarter who were speaking loudly about humans. They belonged to a species called the Vraks, tall and angular beings with sharp features and sharper opinions. "The humans hide something," one of them was saying. "They arrived in council space with technology that rivaled our own. Yet they claim to be a young species. Suspicion is not evidence," another diplomat injected. But the Vraks continued their accusations. "We have heard rumors of wars, of weapons, of secrets buried in their past." The first Vraks insisted. The council should demand full disclosure before allowing them any further access. Kethver found herself wanting to defend the humans, to defend Marcus specifically, but she realized she did not have the information to do so. What was humanity hiding? She decided to find out. That night she followed Marcus at a careful distance as he left Bay 7 and made his way through the station corridors. He walked with a slight limp she had not noticed before, and she wondered what injury had caused it. His quarters were in a modest section of the station, nothing like the luxury accommodations given to diplomats and wealthy traders. She watched as he entered his small apartment, and she saw through the briefly opened door that the living space was simple and sparse. But there was another door inside, one that seemed to lead to a second room, and she caught a glimpse of soft light glowing from within before the main door closed. What was in that room? She almost walked away, telling herself that everyone deserved privacy and that her curiosity was overstepping proper boundaries. But then the door opened again, and Marcus stood there looking at her with eyes that held no anger, only a tired resignation. "You followed me," he said. "I apologize," she replied, feeling genuine shame at being caught. "I did not mean to intrude." Marcus studied her for a long moment, and she felt his emotions shift from guarded caution to something that might have been acceptance. "You want to know what I am hiding?" He said. It was not a question. "Yes," she admitted. "I do." Marcus nodded slowly, and his hand reached up to touch the metal tags beneath his collar. "Then I suppose it is time," he said quietly. "Come back tomorrow night and I will show you everything." He closed the door before she could respond, and Kethver stood in the corridor with her heart beating fast. Tomorrow she would have answers. She only hoped she was ready for them.